Hello everyone, I am Oleg Bobrov and let's start with demonstration of the result. We begin the level at this point arriving by helicopter. There happens the first battle with several enemy waves. After opening the door, players encounter sliding episode. They can shoot enemies in the process. The sliding episode transitions the player to a fight in the inner courtyard. Enemies initially attack from the right, and once players handle them, a second wave attacks from the building on the left. There is a new sliding episode where players discover that enemies have planted explosives that they must defuse within a limited time. After disarming the explosives and climbing on ropes, it's time for the final battle at the top of the advertising cubes. So, my task was to create a level for cooperative third-person shooter for 4 players on mobile. Game controlled through virtual sticks. I need to create 5-minute replayable level. Level should use described enemy types and described active abilities. We will talk about it more later. Everything else is up to the performer. In my case, time for completing the test task was limited, so I used only a few references. Those included Tom Clancy's The Division 2 and Destiny 2, which I played a lot myself, so I simply refreshed my memories. I paid special attention to the details of the game and level design. I aim to promote players sticking together for cooperative gameplay, so I try to explore non-meditative ways to encourage this. A good example is provided by Tom Clancy's Division 2, which makes those running ahead perform short animated actions for the benefit of the whole team, such as opening ammo crates or doors. Guys stretched out a bit, but thanks to the leader's delay in opening the door, they gathered back together. This is a useful example of what you can learn when studying references. I also thought about how to combine the gaming experience in The Division and Destiny with popular casual mobile shooters that successfully blend environment interactivity and visual appeal on mobile devices. It's Helicopter and Johnny Trigger. Now I will show you videos from these games, and in the meantime I will tell you what conclusions I have drawn from watching them. First, due to the small phone screen, it's better to limit the amount of objects and geometry in the game and avoid panoramic views with small details. Second, it's better to use simple, large shapes and enlarge important interactive objects for better visibility. Third, the shooters are controlled via tap. It's simple and convenient. In our case, virtual sticks are used to maintain control. While they handle gentle movements well, precision and responsiveness can suffer in intense situations. I will avoid multiple enemy attacks from different sides to minimize this issue. Also, every flank or rear attack should trigger a red warning marker and sound notification, in my opinion. And I would consider moments in the game where the player will be given a break from using 2 virtual sticks and only leave one for shooting. Those could be moments of the stationary shooting from a helicopter, on a helicopter rope, from a vehicle, etc. The main advantage of reviewing references is that I have noted important nuances that I will take into account when creating the level. This way, I won't make a significant portions of mistakes that could require extensive rework in the future. Game setting: City. I believe the city should be divided into districts like a port district, industrial area, slums, etc. However, it's important to consider not only the visual distinctions, but also the gameplay differences between them. For this level, I choose to concentrate on the Asian-style district, as it resonates more with me. I assumed the biome will differ from the others in the following ways. At first, electric traps are created by destroying large billboards and other neon and glowing objects powered by electricity. They cause damage in an area. Second, air conditioners attached to the side of buildings that fall down when shot at. And third, sloped roofs that provide sliding episodes when players slide on and shoot at emerging enemies. The most crucial aspect in a third-person shooter is, of course, the fights. I started brainstorming engaging encounters by focusing on the basic characteristics of enemies. Once I figure out interesting ways to utilize them, I began to add new elements to see what interesting interaction could arise. Initially, I think about simple fights with just one type of enemy. Then, I think about how to combine multiple enemy types in a single fight. And finally, I consider how the player's abilities and features of Asian-style district could enhance the battles. Let's start with basic fights with one type of enemy. Here we have a top view. Players and their movements are marked in green with green arrows, while enemies and their movements are indicated in red. Fight 1. A massive onslaught of runners with batons charging directly at players. Accuracy and weapon DPS are crucial here, also hitting the enemy's weak points. The higher the player's accuracy, the lower the DPS requirements for clearing the runner wave. Fight 2. Riflemen attack by gradually flanking the player from one side. Players must shoot accurately and promptly adjust their position to counter the flanking threat. Fight 3. A spacious area with many cover spots while players face snipers, needing to move between covers to reach and take out the snipers. Fights with two or more types of enemies. Fight 1. Runners attacking players directly, with players continuously shooting at them. However, the situation is complicated by the presence of snipers with laser sights in the background. They force players to occasionally take cover for a couple of seconds with their shooting. Activating a shared shield will be useful to kill all the runners in time, or a damage amplifier to survive the sniper's fire and kill the approaching runners. Fight 2. Alternating attacks from both sides by runners and riflemen. Players defend from one side, then they need to change position on the same arena and engage in a new battle. It's advisable to use explosive barrels and interactive objects on the arena sparingly to have enough for several waves. Fights that bring players' abilities and the feature of Asian-style districts, like a lot of advertising, neon signs, closely spaced buildings with height variations. Fight 1. Sliding episode along a long slope roof while shooting at enemies on the sides and in front. Fight 2. Fights with riflemen on massive advertising cubes that can be rotated as a result of shots fired on electric switchboards. This leads enemies in cover on the cube, turning towards the player with their uncovered side. As a result, they are forced to change positions. This is when they are most vulnerable. Use of elevator in battles. Here is the side view. There are two possible battle scenarios. First, ascending on an open elevator. Initially, enemies have an upper hand, attacking the players from above with grenades, forcing frequent position changes inside the elevator area. Then, players gaining higher ground gain advantage over remaining enemies below who are left vulnerable. Second situation, descending on an open elevator. At first, the player has advantage over enemies, but if they fail to eliminate all enemies in time, the enemy starts throwing grenades from above, making the player constantly move around, complicating the skirmish with the next group of enemies. So, I noted the following. They need to limit the player's view as needed for optimization purposes. They need to be readable on a small screen. Avoid battles with simultaneous attack from multiple directions for easier virtual stick control. Include slowdown points for those who are running ahead. Ammo boxes, opening doors, calling elevators. Need to add battles where players are limited by space for a more efficient use of character abilities. Introduce interactive objects unique to this district, sliding, electric traps, failing air conditioners, and a list of fights that I want to implement. I quickly checked visual and architecture references on Google and ArtStation. Since time was limited, I only covered the basic minimum to create a 5-minute level. I put together the following collection. In it, I primarily saved arts containing an exciting structure of spaces where interesting shootouts could take place, and interesting architecture of buildings that I could borrow for the Blockout. For instance, what caught my attention here was the huge bridge, a big and unique structure that evoked an emotion in me. The density and clustering of buildings looked intriguing as well. I like the readability of the buildings here, how the author handled geometric shapes, managing to create fantastic yet primarily readable structures from simple forms. I particularly like this building. And here I paid special attention to the number of platforms at different heights. The compactness combined with big amount of horizontal surfaces at various heights and a lot of paths between roofs, those were perfect. Those were the aspects I noted for myself. The initial screens here are not quite suitable, they are too fantastical to pick anything out from among them. Nevertheless, I appreciated the work here. But the screen with strangely connecting roofs caught my attention, and I also took note of it as an architectural reference. The last image is the most accurate reference to what I wanted. I felt inspired to create my courtyard well, where the first wave would emerge from one direction and the second one from the other. The numerous balconies at various heights enable the strategic use of verticality during clashes with opponents. When opponents fell from these platforms in ragdoll, it will look fascinating. Taking into account the selected references, I've sketched out a basic level plan in Mirror. The main goal is to strategize the placement of fight arenas and major objects in relation to each other, their top-down view. In the absence of narrative designer, I choose the mission plot at my discretion. It involves the standard goal of clearing the area of a gang. However, later in their mission, it's unexpectedly discovered that the gang has mined massive advertising cubes, one of the business symbols in the district. Now players must not only clear the area of enemies, but also defuse the cubes. We start the level at this point, arriving by helicopter. The first battle begins immediately. From here, we spot the point of interest, a massive unique object that defines the level, massive advertising cubes. To conceal the rest of the level, there should be something here obstructing the view, which I call blocking view volume. To swiftly transition to the next skirmish and change the scenery after this long battle, I employ a change in pace, offering players a sliding episode. This sliding episode moves the player to a fight in the inner courtyard, where players can get a closer look at the point of interest from a different angle. Here, the player can take a closer look at the point of interest from a different perspective. With this, I wanted to enhance the sense of progression through the level, to show the dynamics of moving through the location. From the inner courtyard, players take an elevator. After players step into the lift, the elevator ascends slowly and enemies emerge to attack. Dense elevator space is a great moment to utilize player abilities. Here, another blocking view volume conceals the rest of the level. Finally, after the ascent, another sliding episode reveals a new perspective of the point of interest, explaining its significance to the player. The unique final battle takes place here, which I will elaborate on later, followed by evacuation from the level via helicopter. To start off, let me show you layout of the first battle. We start the level at this point, arriving by helicopter. I will mark player movements in green and the enemy movement in red from now on. From here, we spot the point of interest, a massive unique object that defines the level, massive advertising cubes. The first battle begins immediately. Here we have enemies who retreat to cover when they spot the player. Depending on the player's skill level and abilities, they either get taken out quickly or try to flank the player from the left side to eliminate them. Players can also use this route to approach the enemy and flank them. There is strategic position here, but reaching it isn't easy as it involves crossing some open space. This position is close to the enemy and vulnerable from the side. I've stuck to the philosophy that each position is good only under specific combat conditions. Each position has dynamic pros and cons depending on the battle situation. Another example of this is after clearing the first wave of enemies on the roof, players move forward where they encounter the second wave of them. This position is safe and very advantageous for picking off enemies coming from the right spawn point, trying to reach cover on this bridge. I show it. However, Enemies also appear from the left spawn point, unseen from this position. And if the players don't pay attention to this direction, they may be unpleasantly surprised by enemies flanking them. I always keep in mind that there are players who prefer to play cautiously and those who, thanks to skill, low difficulty levels, or recklessness, choose an aggressive approach. For them, I think about dangerous but short roads. So, I incline this path for players wanting to charge ahead and try to secure a favorable position right in front of the enemy spawn point. Simultaneously, this path allows enemies to attempt a frontal assault with flank players if everyone chooses to attack via the left road, like that. After clearing the second wave, I determine a box and door that needs to be opened. It takes a few seconds. To allow slow players to catch up with the leaders, as I mentioned using the Division 2 as an example earlier. Upon opening the door, players encounter a sliding episode. As mentioned before, roof sliding serves as a temporary ease of control, a pace change, a quick movement method, and is a unique gameplay feature of the Asian-style district. During the slide, several enemies spawn from here. Another district feature is used here, hanging air conditioners. Players can shoot such an air conditioner, causing it to drop and deliver electric shock in the surrounding radius. Talking about unique district objects, I completely forgot to mention that neon sights that similarly electrocute nearby characters when hit by bullets. Players can activate such traps to easily deal with a group of enemies. But let's get back to sliding. Important point that plays a role in the most battles is that I give players the opportunity to deal with a wave of enemies before they take cover, if they have sharp shooting skills or powerful weapons. This encourages players to be more active and aggressive, and it feels good when the battle outcome depends on the player's skill. This is one of aspects that I noticed a long time ago while playing Division 2. After sliding, player enters the inner courtyard fight. Here, after destroying a wave of enemies from the spawn point and taking cover, players need to quickly react to the danger from another direction, from a high building on the left. They must move to new covers and try to destroy the new wave of enemies before they take advantageous position. Here I introduced a battle concept involving a sudden shift in the enemy attack direction, prompting player to seek new cover and adapt to the new situation. Also, killing enemies here is likely to result in their spectacular falls from narrow ledges, which always looks impressive. After dealing with the wave of enemies, player will see a point of interest from a new perspective. To ensure players look that way, there is an MM box here that catches their attention. To continue moving, you need to take the large open lift. Activating the lever and the lift arrival takes 4-5 seconds, which allows those holding behind to catch up with the leaders. The lift itself requires all players to board in order for movement to begin. As the lift ascends, enemies start approaching from the slope side. Due to the height advantage and cover, players can shoot them without retaliation, earning extra score. However, enemies will appear from the top right after a while. If players fail to eliminate them before they reach cover, they will throw grenades onto the lift floor, forcing players to move alternatively to the left and right sides of the lift. Towards the end of the ascent, with the gained height, players can deal with those enemies too. To avoid slowing down gameplay too much, prevent players' desire to kill all enemies completely, and for optimization purposes the view of the previous part of the level is blocked by this wall. After ascending, during a short sliding episode, player sees a point of interest again, this time up close and from a new perspective. At this moment, they receive information that these advertising cubes are rigged with explosives, and they need to hurry to defuse them. At lower difficulty levels, I would encourage players through narrative alone, but at higher levels, I would introduce a countdown timer to the explosion, for example 60 seconds. Within this time frame, players must clear a small arena with enemies and ascend stairs to the cubes to defuse the explosives. However, let's return to this arena. The main idea was to utilize changing height positions to diversify gameplay and introduce new tactical possibilities. Upon descent, players find themselves in a situation where enemies are advancing them from two directions, and players need to choose one to hold their ground on and counter their attack. The left direction is more challenging, requiring a head-on approach to the emerging enemies, but after clearing them out, it provides an advantage in height position for repelling attacks from the right. It's easier to hold ground on the right direction, with more cover available, but players find themselves in a situation where they must counter attacks from multiple directions, from here and from here. Depending on the level of difficulty, players' confidence in their abilities and the random placement of key objects, like red barrels, for example, the barrel being here or there, or there, player will choose a direction. After the battle is over, they are not sent up to the stairs, where a couple of enemies may spawn, and, upon death, dramatically roll down the stairs. Which is fascinating, I think. Here is a gameplay challenging moment. I had to make the stairs lead to the middle of a platform, where enemies are on both sides. To avoid confusing players and make their tough decision easier on which side to check first, left or right, I added large blocks to the right. Players can safely turn their backs to them and first clear out the enemies on the left before dealing with those who come from the right. Here players defuse explosives and reach the final objective, dealing the remaining enemies of the advertising cubes. A swift climb up a rope leads player to the final battle, the massive advertising cubes fight. This unique showdown begins with players in a challenging situation. The enemies have a slight height advantage and better cover. Enemies emerge in waves from the floor hatch. Players take control of the battle by rotating the advertising cube with the enemies by 90 degrees, shooting at switchboards. Each turn forces enemies to change cover, leaving them vulnerable. The cube can only be rotated 3 times to limit exploitation and add tactical death to each rotation. I will visually demonstrate the enemy movement dynamics between covers after each cube rotation. At the start, enemies emerge from the hatch and move towards this cover. After turning the cube by 90 degrees, they are forced to change position, making them particularly vulnerable at this time. After another turn, the enemies are vulnerable again, but this time they can take a favorable position with even greater height advantage. And finally, the last third turn of the cube makes them move again. Once the last group of enemies is cleared, a helicopter arrives to evacuate the players, marking the end of the mission.